Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we talk about books and other words. I'm Lily.
I'm Sarah.
Well, hi, Sarah. How have you been? Anything great happened this week?
I've been good. This is going to be a very Californian answer. I'm sorry, but it rained yesterday and today, and it was very exciting. We need the rain. So yes, that's my good thing for the week. What about you?
My gaming group started a new Dungeons and Dragons campaign. We're doing Descent into Avernus, and the reason why this is great instead of just normal or good is that this is one of the first campaigns, or maybe not first, but one of the longest campaigns that we're embarking on that my husband is not the dungeon master for. So he actually gets to play.
That's very exciting.
Yeah. So maybe I'm kind of stealing his great thing for this week, but that's okay. He's not here to talk about it, so it gets to be mine.
I mean, it counts. Like, you get to play with your husband. I think that qualifies as a genuinely good thing.
But now I can't make jokes about sleeping with the DM. That's like half of my comedy repertoire.
Oh, darn.
What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a very quality California rosé out of a box.
I am drinking a very quality red blend from Washington out of a box.
What a coincidence.
You made a joke about us drinking the same thing, and I didn't realize how accurate it was going to be.
I mean, I made that joke because I knew what kind of wine you drink.
Yeah.
I knew what I was drinking. So, yes. Have you read anything good lately?
I have. You kind of let the cat out of the bag when you tweeted about it.
Sorry, not sorry.
No, it was fun. I stumbled upon an article from The Verge about people binding fan fiction into like gorgeous books with like pretty covers and stuff, which was, I mean, mostly just fun because like it's really cool that people are doing that. So yeah, it was fun to read about. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I read that article too. You sent it to me.
Yeah.
And I read it, and it was really neat. If I had the time and the patience to actually like print out and organize fanfiction pages, I would quite possibly consider doing that. But I have neither of those things, so I leave it to the more talented people in the fandom.
How about you? Read anything good lately?
I have, actually. I did quite a lot of reading these past 2 weeks, none of which was, well, little of which was The Wheel of Time, which I'm supposed to be reading. But
I'm a bad influence. I'm sorry.
It's all this podcast's fault. But yeah, so some of the things that I read a book called Afro Puffs Are the Antennae of the Universe by Zigzag Claiborne, which was just a delightful romp. I also read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. No idea if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Where this one, I wasn't intending to read this. There's a TV show coming out on Netflix based on this. And I wanted to read it eventually. Yeah, the show looks good. But I wanted to read it eventually, but I wasn't planning on doing it now. But I was just in a mood, like, you know, where you just want to read something that you don't have to think about. It's going to be fun and like not deep. I just wanted comfort reading, only this is not a book that I'd read before, so I don't really know if I'd consider it comfort reading. But so it was good. Like, I really liked the concept and the world building. The characters felt a little bit flat, and the romance just did not interest me at all. But on the other hand, if I had been like 10 or 15 years younger, the Darkling would have been completely my type. Like, black-haired, handsome, dubiously evil, like 15-year-old Sarah would have been all over that.
I think everyone had a villain phase, right?
Quite possibly. And he seems like a good villain. So there's 2 more books to this particular trilogy. I think the expanded universe might have more. I'll probably just stick with this trilogy and not actually read any of the other books. But so that was fun. And then I talked about Legacy of the Brightwash by Crystal Matar in our last episode very briefly. But I finished that book last night. I was not intending to finish it. I had like 150 pages left.
Oh, that's the best feeling,
yeah.
though. When you just throw responsibility to the wind and say, I don't care if I'm a grown-up. I'm going to read this book at 2 a.m.
Well, like I went to bed and I was like, oh, it's not very late. I still have 150 pages left. I'll just read a chapter or two. And then, oops, I only have 11 pages left. So it ends on a horrible cliffhanger. Horrible, horrible cliffhanger. I really want the next book to come out. This will probably end up being one of my top books for the year. It was very good. I'm gonna do it a bit of a disservice and just focus on the tension between Toshue and Stella, where Toshue is like the main character and Stella's his love interest. But the tension between the two of them, like, oh my God, I basically was yelling at the book. 60 to 70% of the time I was reading, like, just kiss already, please, God, just kiss.
And you aren't a big romance person.
Yeah, like, so. Which is something that really surprised me because I'm not a big romance person. But the tension, oh my God.
What genre is that book, other than romance?
It's not actually romance. It's like gaslamp fantasy, sort of.
Okay, now I admit that I have no idea what that means. Does it just mean that there's lanterns that are gas-powered in it?
I don't really understand what that means either, but it like Victorian era England-ish with the kind of like aesthetic of carriages and gas lamps, only fantasy.
It's a subgenre of fantasy and historical fiction. It employs either the Victorian or Edwardian setting.
Yeah, see?
It is not to be confused with steampunk, which is in the same historical area, but steampunk is obviously the science version of it. Okay.
Yeah.
I was paraphrasing that a little bit. I have a lot of feelings about steampunk. We're not going to get into it right now.
This is not the episode.
No. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but very, very good.
Why is Dracula the like picture they chose for the Wikipedia article?
On Gaslamp Fantasy? That's a choice.
I guess. I don't consider something written in the period it takes place historical fiction.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't either.
Like, Dracula isn't historical fiction because it was written then. Pride and Prejudice isn't historical fiction because it was contemporary. Anyway, we're also not going to get into that. Sorry. That sounds really good. How long was the book? Like, give or take.
It's quite long. It's like 730 pages or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a commitment. I was actually expecting to go through it a lot slower than I did because I was reading it in ebook format, and I don't dedicate the time for ebook reading the way I do for like actual physical books. But the characters and the plot like draw you in, so you don't notice the time passing. Well,
it sounds very good.
It is. You should read it. I'm on a campaign to get Lilly to read this.
All right. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying that my time's a little booked right now.
I see what you did there.
I realized it halfway through the sentence and decided to commit.
Good for you. I mean, that was a pun worth making.
Another book that you said you were supposed to be reading, but have not been, is whatever number 24 of the Wheel of Time series that you're on.
Book 10 of Wheel of Time. I mean, I did read it, actually. I did finish it, which I guess I finished it over this 2-week period, too. And I know I keep flip-flopping on it because the first time I talked about it, I said it didn't sound like a slog. It seemed like a slog. And last time I talked about it, I said, no, I changed my mind. It really is a slog. And this time I'm going to say, well, the last 400 pages were not very much a slog. So if only a quarter of the book is a slog, does it really count as like slog with a capital S? I'm not sure.
Like, that's a whole other book that you could have read instead.
Yeah, I mean, like that's very true. A
lot of book.
That's very true, but it's not the majority of the book. Like, not even close. So a lot of the book was really interesting and enjoyable. It was just these 200 pages in the middle that were horrible.
Well, but you started book 11 now?
I did start book 11. I'm only about 30 pages in, so I can't actually speak to it.
Careful. You're going to say it's not a slog and then hit the part that is.
Maybe. I'm supposed to be exiting the slog, though. So I think that all of the books from here on out, I could be wrong about whether or not 11 is considered part of the slog, but books 12 through 14 are definitely not, or supposed to not be. I mean, we'll see how I feel about them. Switching gears from Wheel of Time, how are you progressing with your Witcher adventures?
I was going to say I've made it out of Act 1. I have no idea if that's true. I don't actually know how long this game is. I did find Yennefer, though, so
Woohoo!
like that's plot moving forward. I have to say the game itself is hard for me because I haven't gotten to the part where you're doing the fun fantasy stuff yet, and I'm mostly just like murdering puppies. And I mean, they're wild dogs and they're trying to kill me, but they sound like puppies when you fight them. And that's not fun.
Yeah, no, that's not like I'm all for murdering people in games. Obviously not in real life. I'm not pro murder, but puppies.
It's just hard. And at one point it wanted me to fight a bear, and I was like, those are endangered. I'm running away instead. I am under the impression that eventually I will get to start fighting monsters. I mean, I have fought some, drowners, which are creatures that live in the water and try to drown you. They're kind of
I never would have guessed.
I know. They're kind of like fish-looking zombie thing. They're not zombies. They're not undead, but whatever, not the point. I have fought, ghouls and wraiths and stuff, but most of what I'm fighting is wolves. Percentage-wise, it's maybe 10% monsters right now.
Oh, that's quite low.
Yeah. There's also a lot of, people who ran away so they won't get drafted into the invading army's army.
And you have to fight them too?
Well, if you run into them, they attack you.
Oh.
So, and if I want their loot, yes.
I mean, if they're attacking me first, I feel less bad about killing them.
I mean, yeah, but it's still not like... I get why in this world they are villains. They're considered bandits, deserters, or whatever.
Right.
But it still is kind of sucks to have to fight them.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of ambiguity there.
Yeah.
It's not the guilt-free murder that you can enjoy.
And a lot of them don't even have weapons. It's like, stop touching me. I'm going to behead you.
Yeah, that's just not a fair fight.
No. I mean, they have killed me a couple times, so maybe it's a little fair. Or maybe I'm just bad at video games. Plot-wise, though, like I said, I did finally find Yennefer, who is, probably my favorite character from the show. It's very interesting to see how different she is in the game.
How so?
Well, I haven't seen very much of her. And the game takes place maybe 20 years after the show, like a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the differences can definitely be attributed to that. But she's much cooler. Her demeanor is much cooler. But I think that's just because in the show, we're seeing her moments of passion.
Yeah.
Whereas this is the face I imagine she's showing to courts, because that's where you run into her as a court,
Is she still a romantic interest?
She's your ex, which is the exact relationship that you see progress in the show. So that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yes, that does make a lot of sense.
And I do know that I'm eventually going to have to pick a love interest in the game. And I don't know who I'm going to choose.
Is there an option to just, not pick anyone?
There might be. That sounds like no fun, though.
That sounds like what I would want to do. I don't want to pick a love interest.
All right. You've seen the show. Do you ship anyone in the show?
Not really. I mean... I liked Geralt and Yennefer, but I wouldn't say that I liked them to the extent of actively shipping them.
It's funny, I read quite a bit of Witcher fan fiction, but it's mostly just because I love the characters, and I do love reading about the relationships between them. But I wouldn't say I actually have a preference one way or the other. There is quite a bit of Geralt Jaskier.
That doesn't surprise me.
I was going to say, to everyone's shock. And if there's a lot of something, that means you can find good versions of it.
Right.
just the more options there are, the more chance it is you'll find something quality. So there is that benefit. But when I was watching the show, their platonic relationship was complicated enough that I didn't feel like I needed them to be together.
Right.
And there is part of me that dislikes the tendency for all male friends to be paired together in fandom, because there is value in, men having platonic relationships with each other and letting that be normalized.
For sure. I mean, I think that tendency comes more from the lack of representation otherwise.
Oh yeah.
So if we just had more diverse TV, then it wouldn't be an issue.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't ship friends together, because that would be silly and also incredibly hypocritical. But it's not.
You just like the relationship as friends.
Yeah. That's not to say I'm not going to read a steamy romance between them. That's just because if there's some good writing involved, I don't really care who it is.
Which is another difference between you and I, which I find really interesting. Like, it doesn't matter how good the writing is. If I'm not invested in a relationship, I'm not going to want to read a steamy romance between these two characters.
You're talking specifically about fan fiction where you have opinions already about the characters, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, mostly fan fiction, because I don't go out of my way to read steamy romances in non-fan fiction work.
My prerequisite to that was if it's a good, well-written, I don't care. And that's because I think part of something being well-written is creating a good dynamic between the leads.
Yeah, but I agree with you there, but also if I don't care for the character relationship, I guess you're right in that I'm talking specifically about having...
Yeah, you don't like them in the source material, so you don't want to read fan fiction about them.
Exactly.
And there are definitely pairings that just make me cringe and I can't do it. So I'm not going to say that I'll read anything. But maybe it's just for The Witcher, because I like the world and I like all of the characters. I don't really have a preference with the romance plot lines that I'm reading, because
maybe
they're all interesting.
Maybe
they all have different dynamics.
But I'm saying I like The Witcher and I like the characters, but I wouldn't want to read a romance between Geralt and Jaskier just because that does not interest me whatsoever, no matter how well it's written.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
I don't. But I was just bringing it up because it's interesting to see the differences between you and I as readers.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, someone reached out to us on Instagram and asked if we were interested in reading his book. And I said that I didn't have the time because I was planning on reading the Wheel of Time books, with varying levels of success there. But Lilly, you read it, right?
I did, yes. This week I read Cycles of the Phoenix, the whole Interlaced Soul series by C.A. Nicholas.
Thank you, C.A. Nicholas, for providing us with a copy to review.
Yeah, that was really fun to get.
It was exciting.
So this book, I think it was about 500 pages long, and something I noticed, I added it to our Goodreads, like planning to read list or something, and I noticed that it was listed or noted somehow as being sort of intergenre, and I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind if you want to read this book. It's absolutely a mix of prose and poetry, which, if you're coming into this expecting just sort of a concrete fantasy novel with the basic 3-act structure, that's not what it's going to be. It is, first of all, a collection of short stories, and there's definitely poetry influences, I want to say. That's not...
How so?
There's a lot of figurative language,
mm-hmm.
and these works are definitely more focused on the reader experiencing an emotion versus following a story.
Mm.
And when I sort of let go and, approached it like poetry, you're not always going to know exactly where the setting is or exactly who the characters are involved. It's a little bit more of a gray area. When I sort of let go of my novel assumptions, if you will, and approached it more like poetry, more of a journey of I'm just gonna go with it, and it's okay if I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I'll probably figure it out eventually. It was really fun.
What would you say your favorite thing about this was?
Nicholas was very good at starting each short story, each section in medias res. There was no narrative fluff. There was absolutely no filler. Like, you jumped in and you were immediately immersed in what was going on. Everything was happening immediately right there to you. And the sort of withholding of information, right? It's not cinematically the establishing shot and then it zooms in on the house and then you see the living room. No, it just starts in where it's happening, which was very, very good, but it happened a lot.
Do you think it was too much?
That joke where you go to a job interview and they ask you what your faults are and you say, I work too hard. I'm too dedicated at my job. I'm, all of my weaknesses are actually strengths. That, it sort of feels like Cycles of the Phoenix was that in book form, because all of these things Nicholas did really, really well, but did them so much that I wasn't able to appreciate them when they happened.
Right. It was just kind of overwhelming.
Exactly. Especially with, starting a scene in medias res. Like I said at the beginning, I often had no idea where I was at all. And that can be very cool, but when every scene is that way, it gets a little overwhelming.
Right.
And then sometimes just in a story, the scene would shift and there was not really an indication of that. It would sometimes be mid-paragraph. And I was like, oh, apparently we're outside now. Okay. That being said, the way he paced information made for some incredible twists. I was actually texting you
yes,
while I was reading this.
I remember a text that you sent.
There's just a lot of, oh shit, in all caps. It was really exciting and compelling.
I think that's really actually, for whatever other faults this book may have, I think that's a huge endorsement.
Absolutely. And it definitely sucked me in. Like I said, there were no boring moments.
Which is good.
I do like poetry. So I said this up top, I'm going to say it again. This is a novel for poetry readers. Or, I'm not saying don't read it if you don't like poetry, but there is an awful lot of poetic language.
Be forewarned.
Be forewarned. But also you have to just kind of ride with it. Just kind of let it take you in, go with it. Similar to the information pacing, the language did get a little bit too much for me at times. But in the similar way of too much of a good thing, I wasn't able to stop and appreciate some of these sentences just because they kept coming at me. There was just no pause. There were maybe some moments where it got a little out of hand. I personally wouldn't use the word countenance in the place of the word face. That just feels a little too far. But I also tend to favor plain language.
Yeah, I can see a time and a place for using countenance instead.
Yeah. It's just that it's a stylistic choice.
Right.
And it's the type of style that I just enjoy more when it's sparing.
A little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, and reading 500 pages of this incredibly over the top prose just kind of got a lot.
Do you think it would have been easier to read if you had spread it out more? Like if you read one short story and then something in between and then another short story?
That's actually a really good point, because this is a collection of short stories, and I think that might be the best way to experience it, because then you can sort of get it in chunks and, sit with it and
internalize it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of have, like you're doing with Wheel of Time, palette cleansers in between.
Yes.
Just to shake up the tone, I think, because it does have a very strong style that I think if I had not read it in a week, I probably would have appreciated more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And 500 pages in a week is a lot to read, too. I mean, in my opinion, anyway. Other people might disagree with me, but...
No, it was definitely a sprint, and this was not a book that you should sprint through.
Yeah.
But that being said, I definitely enjoyed it, so... It was just something that I noticed happening while I read it.
Right. I mean, overall, it sounds like an enjoyable read, as long as you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, exactly. Buckle up and let C.A. Nicholas be your tour guide through this world that he has patched together, and just sort of let go of the reins and let him take you. And I would say, just sort of to wrap up, why should you read this book? Read this book. We try to do that, right? If you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free. Heck, just read the first one and see if you can jump into the style and if that works for you. Otherwise, I think it's like $3 for an ebook, which, I mean, that's the kind of price range that I don't mind taking a risk,
For sure.
So if it seems like something that's interesting, I say go for it. We return to you again on this, our second step of our journey to the center of the Discworld. Book 2 is called The Light Fantastic, and of course, for those of you not in the know, Discworld is a series of books written by Terry Pratchett.
The late and great.
The late and great Sir Terry Pratchett, excuse me.
Yes.
It was pointed out to me that we never actually explained what the fuck a Discworld is.
Who needs that kind of information anyway? Pshaw.
Basic setting details.
Nah, that's not important. That's not important.
Well, other than an ambiguously fantasy setting, what is a Discworld, Sarah?
So the Discworld is a disc that is carried on the back of 4 turtles.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. I'm getting this completely. I know. You know how when someone asks you a question and you're not expecting it, you just your brain clams up, even though you completely know the answer. Well,
it's like we didn't explain it last time, because asking what a Discworld is like asking what I can't even come up with a simile now.
What an Earth is?
Yeah, what is a cat? How do you explain what a cat is? It's a cat. It just is.
Yeah, I mean, so in this case, the Discworld is, a disc that is carried on the backs of 4 elephants, not turtles, but the elephants are standing on a turtle who is swimming through space.
And a disc, specifically, we mean a flat planet.
Yes, with water streaming off of its sides.
So that, and I mean, that is relevant, right? Because at the end of The Color of Magic, we leave Rincewind and Two Flower, the main characters of these books, plummeting over the side of the disc.
Yes.
They were launched into space, and that is almost exactly where this book picks up.
Yeah, I mean, there's very little time in between the end of The Color of Magic and the start of The Light Fantastic.
I don't remember how much this comes up in The Color of Magic, but our main critique of The Color of Magic, and by consequence The Light Fantastic, is that these feel more like a series of punchlines than a true narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. Would you say that's fair?
I'd say that's fair of the first one. I mean, The Color of Magic definitely has, I would say, 4 distinct arcs to it, but this one was much more coherent.
I was going to say this one introduced a through line that you sort of followed through all of the different hijinks that Rincewind and Two Flower get into, there's the sort of B plot of the wizards at the Unseen University trying to unravel a mystery that is sort of tangentially related to Rincewind until it is much more so. Why should you read this book, Sarah? Is it obvious because Discworld is good and it's part of it?
I mean, there's that, like, it has Terry Pratchett's characteristic wit and humor, even if it's not quite as refined as you get in later books. And it also has some really interesting social commentary, but in general, I think they're fun books. And this one is no different. It's fun.
It is. And definitely, if you're going to read The Color of Magic, you should read this one too.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to necessarily read one for the other.
I mean, I would almost say if you're only going to read one of the two, I would almost say read The Light Fantastic.
Oh yeah, because he catches you up at the beginning of the book. Not with a plot of The Color of Magic, but he reintroduces all of the characters to you.
Yeah.
Although we still aren't recommending that you start Discworld with this book.
This is not the book to start Discworld with, no.
So if you already know Discworld, don't worry about spoilers. If you don't already know Discworld, go read a different one first and then come back and don't worry about spoilers. Does that sound fair?
I think that about sums it up. Yeah.
All right. To avoid spoilers for The Light Fantastic, skip forward to 4835. One of the things we did love about The Color of Magic, I phrased that weird. We loved the whole book, just, one of the parts that stands on its own merit and not our obsessive fangirling is the way he subverts classic fantasy tropes. And this book, The Light Fantastic, has a few new ones for us to enjoy.
Although they're not quite as, the source material that he is using in the first, it's much more segregated in the first book. Like it's not a through line the way that it is here.
He sort of integrates the different references together instead of having each one stand in its own part.
Yeah, I think the integration is much better.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Not that it's not very clear that he's riffing on Conan the Barbarian. I mean, the Barbarian is called Cohen. Like,
I love that though. What happens when Conan gets old?
It's wonderful.
That's a great question.
It is a really good question.
He loses all his teeth and it's really sad.
He has a really good quote about it about how he never gets any royalties. That's the saga of my life. 80 years in the business, and what have I got to show for it? Backache, piles, bad digestion, and 100 different recipes for soup. And I'm not doing the accent. Believe you me, you would be thanking me for that.
Because he's lost all his teeth.
Cohen has lost all his teeth, yeah.
But he gets dentures by the end, so, that's a successful character arc.
It all works out, yeah.
Okay, so he does end up with the sexy young virgin sacrifice that they rescue. And I have to remind myself that this book is hilarious, and that is supposed to be hilarious. Because if you remind yourself, or at least I had to remind myself, that that's a joke, and not, because you just see that so often that it's hard to remember that Pratchett means it as to be funny.
Yeah, he's very definitely not taking that as, yes, it's a joke.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
But then you get it, like, in real life, actors in Hollywood, a woman will play an actor's wife in one movie and then a year later play his mother. So, like, that age disparity between the genders is maybe just a sore point for me. But it's a joke. It's okay.
Yeah, he does not mean for it to be taken seriously as any sort of, like, actual relationship between the two.
Right. And, like, Bethan is a great character.
She is.
The sacrifice that they rescue Bethan.
She was very unhappy about being rescued, too. She wanted to be sacrificed.
I love, she's so good. This book is so funny. There is another gender issue that Pratchett riffs on. And I want to say riffs instead of touches on, because it's really, like I said, it's a joke. It's supposed to be funny. It's okay. And he does do such a good job of the characters are being ridiculous, but you can clearly tell that he is making fun of them. Pratchett isn't saying that this is okay. He's just saying this is how they think. The wizarding school, the unseen university, is all men. All wizards in this world are men.
And the senior officials or administrators who we see, who are generally the only wizards that we see, especially at this point in the series, are all old men.
I mean, he's clearly riffing off of academia, right?
Probably, yeah.
These old professors who do nothing but smoke and pontificate.
Old fuddy-duddies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at one point, Rincewind needs the help of a spirit woman, not a spirit woman, of a chieftain's grandmother. She doesn't even really have a title. Just some lady who can do magic.
I mean, shaman would really be the closest.
But there is a shaman that we see, and in a different area is the only reason why I don't want to use that phrase. It doesn't matter. She's a practitioner of magic, and she reads his tarot cards. And he's like, I don't even believe in those. Those are women's work. And it's hilarious. Trust me, you had to be there. But the actual line, so he's confronted with needing this woman to help him. He still had his pride, and wizards don't like to see women perform even simple magic. Unseen University had never admitted women, muttering something about problems with the plumbing. But the real reason was an unspoken dread that if women were allowed to mess around with magic, they would probably be embarrassingly good at it. One of the other very poignant jokes that he makes is about classism. That you noted this one, actually.
Oh, yeah. So there is a section in the book where Rincewind, who is talking about it.
He's probably talking about Two Flower.
Yes, he is talking about Two Flower, actually.
Just reading the quote, I could tell.
Yes. So Rincewind and Rincewind and Cohen are talking about Two Flower. And Rincewind is saying that essentially Two Flower's vision of what has just happened is a lot more idealistic and rose-colored than what actually just happened. And so Cohen asks, he's mad? Sort of mad, but mad with lots of money. Then he can't be mad. I've been around. If a man has lots of money, he's just eccentric, which I think really neatly points out the double standards by which the wealthy and poor are judged. Like, by any metric, you would be judged as not right, except that you have money, so of course you're right.
I mean, I think a really obvious example of that is hoarding.
Yeah.
You can have the same amount of stuff, but if you have a professional cleaner come in and dust it all the time, then suddenly you're not a hoarder.
If it's on shelves, then that makes it all okay.
This is jumping ahead a little bit, but I think...
I mean, we've kind of been jumping around the whole time.
I mean, so I'm not even talking about this book anymore.
Oh.
But on the same note, something that I probably, well, maybe this is just the corner of the internet that I inhabit, but probably the most quoted passage from Terry Pratchett is Sam Vime's economic theory of bootstraps.
Yeah.
Or that's not exactly what it is, but
it's his economic theory of, it might just be boots or boot soles, because he's talking
right
specifically about boot soles and wearing out.
We'll get into that when we get to those books, but I just think that's an oft repeated quote of Pratchett's, and just kind of reinforces his really pithy way of just sort of exposing and digging into these soft points in society that maybe people get comfortable with not looking at.
That's a quote from Men at Arms, by the way.
Okay.
His theory of economic inequality or whatever.
I thought it had a sillier name than that. That's just a very serious name.
The Sam Vimes Boots theory of economic injustice.
There you go.
But it comes from the book Men at Arms.
Well, we'll get there someday.
We will get there eventually.
And we'll talk about it again.
We will. But yeah, I mean, a theme that runs through his books are these, he points out some of the more unpleasant realities of our world through means of humor in this fantasy world. And he does it really, really well.
he gets away with being a lot more pointed and explicit because he's talking about, well, because he's ostensibly talking about the Discworld, right?
Right.
So he is criticizing the Discworld, but of course, when you're reading it, you're like, well, obviously that is also true about our,
Right.
our society. Mm-hmm. When it's couched in jokes and talking about this flat planet on the back of 4 elephants on the back of a turtle swimming through space, it just softens it.
A spoonful of sugar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. A spoonful of Discworld.
Mm-hmm. One thing not really related to the social commentary at all, but that I get a big kick out of is that he paints druids as sort of the equivalent of software engineers. And they're talking about like, oh, our computer programming can't be wrong. These giant stones that we have can't be wrong. It's actually the sun that's wrong. And that's my field, and I love it. It makes me so happy. I laugh every time I see it. I
had actually completely forgotten about that, and when I got to that part, I almost did a spit take.
It's so good.
It's so charming.
It is. Charming is a really good way to describe this book and his writing in general, I think.
You know who else was very charming? Death.
We see a much more familiar Death, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
He's much closer to the Death that appears in the later books.
In this book, Two Flower is trying to teach the 4 riders of the apocalypse. I got the impression it was Bridge.
Yes, I think it's Bridge.
And it's some goofy Discworld version of Bridge.
Well, there's a running joke throughout the first book and this book that a lot of Two Flower's language doesn't really translate well, like it's modern language, and that he would use terms like insurance and dentures and things like that, and that doesn't translate well to the Ankh-Morpork dialect. And so there's a lot of miscommunication around the characters trying to explain in outlandish ways, like making the mouth sounds for dentures or insurance or whatever in sewer ants.
Now, there is one other note that we have to get to, just because it involved you texting me, is ejaculate masculine?
I was asking because I did very specifically want to call wizardry ejaculatory, because at one point, Rincewind is doing magic, which is not something that he's used to doing. As I think we've said before, he's a very bad wizard. The text says that he's possibly the worst wizard on the disc. But he has this spell in his head, and this spell is essentially doing magic through Rincewind. And he says that he talks about how it was better than orgasming. And I made a note because I think actually this is one of the only times in the series that Pratchett actually talks about like orgasms, at least using that term, but that's not something that I could Google on my computer because I use my work computer for everything. That's not a phrase you want in your work computer history.
One of our clients was a sex toy chain, so I could Google whatever I want.
Aren't you lucky?
Well, not the exact same thing, and probably comes up more often just because of the trope of virginity in human culture.
I think that he talks about it, but not in so blunt terms.
Right. Well, when Bethany is introduced, one of the reasons why she's so mad, Bethan, who is the sacrifice that they rescued from being sacrificed. The reason she gives for being so mad is that all of those Saturday nights where I just did nothing down the drain.
I mean, can
you know how hard it is to stay
Can you blame her? Like,
not at all.
I'd be a little peeved too.
Yeah, that's a commitment. But that's an example of Pratchett being a little bit more coy. Like,
yeah.
He doesn't even use the word virgin until like 3 pages later. But, Oh, a sacrifice, saying that she gave like forwent something in order to qualify as a sacrifice. We all know what she was talking about.
Yeah. I would argue that one knows even earlier, because I feel like druids and virgin sacrifices are something that's ingrained in popular culture, if not actual like historical realism.
Homegirl was dressed in all white. I think we know what that means. But Pratchett communicates exactly the situation without actually saying it outright.
Right.
Whereas when Rincewind is talking later about magic, it feels a lot more to the point.
Yeah.
And I explicit, but then I'm not saying that like the word orgasm is explicit, but
I mean it's comparatively explicit.
It in a figurative language sense, not in a dirty language sense.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, so because wizardry is very much a boys' club, as we've said before, like the Unseen University only accepts men. It's all old men at the top of it. So my note was wizardry is ejaculatory.
and that's backed up in later books. And it does feel bad pulling. It doesn't feel bad. It feels like cheating, pulling in stuff that I know happens later because it hasn't happened yet. But we do eventually meet witches. We do later see a society of magic users that are women, and it is very completely not wizardry. And I do think a lot of that is Pratchett pulling from our culture, right?
I mean, there's the maiden, mother, and crone trope and the wise woman trope that he's playing on. Yeah.
Female magic users in stories tend to be othered. They're the witches in the swamp. They're not the wizard at court helping the king.
They also tend to not have as academic a kind of magic. Like wizardry tends to be very rule-based, whereas witchcraft is more emotion-based. I mean,
well, that almost harkens back to ancient Greek philosophers saying women are more similar to animals than people because there's not even anything going on in their heads. Like, yeah, people have been saying that about ladies for a very long time.
Yeah.
And Pratchett is just sort of...
Yeah, I mean, he's playing on that.
Is running with that. Yeah. So I just wanted to back him up. And, like, he didn't make all of the wizards dudes and all of the witches ladies because that was his decision. Like, he clearly has a basis in cultural reference.
Yeah, he's very clearly, like, playing it's just another trope.
Well, let's leave our listeners off with a short excerpt from The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett.
Okay. This is a quote from kind of the end of the book, and I really like it because I think it's a good reminder that no, you might not do any good or be any use in a situation, but that's not necessarily a reason to not try. And it is Two Flower talking to Rincewind. Hold on, he said, as cheerfully as he could manage. This sort of thing is a job for the likes of Cohen, not you. No offense. That's Rincewind, by the way. Would he do any good? Rincewind looked up at the actinic light that lanced down through the distant hole at the top of the staircase. No, he admitted. Then I'd be as good as him, wouldn't I? Said Two Flower, flourishing his looted sword.
So I got a great, or maybe an excellent series of texts from you the other day.
A very annoyed series of texts, anyway. I don't know about great or excellent. But yeah, I was reading a fan fiction, and the main character, one of the main characters, has a very strong Cockney accent. And so the author wrote that out, like, and I can't even, I mean, I don't really want to make you suffer through hearing me try to approximate it.
But that's what reading it was like, I assume.
Yes, yes. It was a very phonetic dialogue where there were lots of, missing consonants and like oohs, and it was awful. Like, it was painful to read. I had, blood streaming out the side of my ears. Like, it was just, it was so bad. And I think accents, strong accents like that, like I don't mind a hint of an accent here and there, but like strong accents that are.
Well, it's okay if a character has an accent. It's
Yeah.
just how they write it.
Yeah, I certainly don't mind if a character has an accent, and I don't even mind if it's written into the dialogue a little bit, but when it's a really strong accent, it's so jarring to see it in the like phonetically in the dialogue. Like it completely takes me out of the story if I'm trying to decipher what they're saying because they're missing, they're missing letters all over the place.
I think accents are one situation where I would rather you tell and not show.
Yes, definitely. Like, okay, so maybe, for example, if they're French and they have some Z's in there, like that I can deal with, but anything stronger or harder than that, I'm like, please just tell me, don't show me.
I kind of like, and I know that this can be done very poorly. I think maybe more in movies and TV shows it's not okay, but in writing, just like give me one or two words in the other language. I know that can be done very ham-fisted.
Yeah.
But it's also a possibility that
although
that's not always terrible, right?
That's not really something you can do when it's, for example, a dialect of English.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. That only works for an accent from a different language.
Yeah, but so that's my pet peeve for the episode.
That sure is
was horrible. The fic is otherwise very good, so I'm going to continue to read it, and I hope that the accent just goes away at some point, like elocution training or something. But
maybe that'll be a whole plot arc. This character goes through speech therapy.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know how much more of that I can take.
Well, fingers crossed for you.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
You can get in touch with us on Instagram and Twitter at FictionFansPod, or shoot us an email at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
Have a great 24 hours. Bye.
Bye.